You don't belong in this neighborhood. Karen Mitchell's scream cut through the peaceful Saturday morning air in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's most prestigious neighborhoods. The 40-something white woman stood on her manicured lawn, pointing an accusatory finger at the black woman calmly unloading boxes from a moving truck. Karen's voice carried that particular tone of self-righteous authority that suggested she appointed herself the unofficial gatekeeper of Maple Ridge Drive. But Karen had no idea who she was really talking to. The woman she was harassing, Dr. Amelia Washington, was one of America's youngest federal judges, appointed to the Northern District Court of Georgia at age 45. She had presided over hundreds of cases, made decisions that shaped legal precedent, and commanded respect from lawyers across the country. But right now, in her moving day clothes and sneakers, she looked like any other woman trying to settle into her new home. Dr. Washington paused, a heavy box still in her hands, and turned toward Karen with the kind of measured calm that comes from years of dealing with difficult people in high-pressure situations. Her expression didn't change, didn't show anger or surprise, just the quiet patience of someone who had seen this behavior before. "Excuse me," Dr. Washington said, her voice steady and controlled. Karen took a step closer, emboldened by what she perceived as weakness. "You heard me. This is a respectable neighborhood. We have standards here. I don't know how you managed to afford a house on this street, but you clearly don't understand the kind of community this is." Dr. Washington carefully set down the box and faced Karen fully. She was an elegant woman with natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing jeans and a simple T-shirt that somehow still conveyed dignity. Her presence was commanding even in casual clothes, though Karen was too blinded by prejudice to notice. "And what kind of community is that?" Dr. Washington asked, her tone remaining remarkably even. "A quiet, family-oriented community," Karen replied, crossing her arms. "We don't have loud parties. We don't have, that kind of behavior. We maintain our property values." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Washington had heard these coded words before, in courtrooms, in legal briefs, in the careful language people used when they couldn't say what they really meant. She understood exactly what Karen was suggesting. Other neighbors had begun to notice the commotion. Mrs. Chen from next door peeked out from behind her curtains. The Johnsons across the street slowed their morning jog to watch. A few people working in their yards had stopped what they were doing, sensing tension in the air. "I see," Dr. Washington said calmly. "And you're concerned that I might somehow disrupt this community atmosphere?" "Look, I'm not trying to be mean," Karen said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just being honest. This neighborhood has a certain demographic. It's nothing personal, but property values, crime rates, these things matter." Dr. Washington felt a familiar fire building in her chest, the same righteous anger that had driven her through law school, through years of fighting for justice, through countless cases where she'd seen the real-world impact of prejudice and discrimination. But she'd learned long ago that anger without strategy was useless. "I appreciate your honesty, Doctor," Washington said, pulling out her phone. "Perhaps I should call someone who can help clarify the situation." Karen brightened, misunderstanding completely. "Oh, good. You're calling your real estate agent? I hope they can help you find somewhere more suitable." Dr. Washington didn't respond. Instead, she dialed a number and waited. When someone answered, she spoke clearly enough for Karen and the gathering neighbors to hear. "Hello, this is Judge Washington. I'm having a small issue at my new residence, and I may need some assistance from courthouse security." Karen's confident expression faltered slightly. "Judge?" Dr. Washington continued her call. Yes, 1247 Maple Ridge Drive in Buckhead. A neighbor is informing me that I don't belong in this neighborhood and suggesting I should leave. I thought the legal department might want to be aware. The color began draining from Karen's face as the words sank in. Judge, legal department, courthouse security. Wait, Karen stammered. You're a judge? Dr. Washington ended her call and turned back to Karen with the same calm expression. Dr. Amelia Washington, United States District Judge for the Northern District of Georgia. And you are? The street had gone completely quiet. Mrs. Chen had come out onto her porch now, no longer hiding behind curtains. The Johnsons had stopped jogging entirely and were standing in the middle of the street, watching. A few more neighbors had emerged from their houses, drawn by the unusual commotion. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I didn't know. I wasn't. You weren't what? Dr. Washington asked, her judicial tone emerging for the first time. You weren't making assumptions about my character, my lifestyle, and my right to live in this neighborhood based solely on the color of my skin? No, that's not. I would never, Karen protested weakly, but her voice lacked conviction. Dr. Washington took a step forward, not threatening, but with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding a courtroom. Ms. Mitchell, is it? Let me explain something to you. I have spent the last 20 years of my life working in the legal system. I've seen every form of discrimination, every coded word, every subtle and not so subtle way that people try to maintain systems of exclusion. Karen looked around desperately, as if seeking support from the other neighbors, but found only uncomfortable stares and a few people shaking their heads in disapproval. I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School, Dr. Washington continued. I clerked for a Supreme Court justice. I've prosecuted federal crimes, defended constitutional rights, and presided over cases that have affected thousands of lives. I've dedicated my career to ensuring that the law protects everyone equally, regardless of race, religion, or economic status. The words hit Karen like physical blows. This wasn't just any neighbor she'd tried to intimidate. This was someone with real power, real authority, and a deep understanding of exactly what laws Karen might have violated with her behavior. Ma'am, I'm so sorry, Karen said, her voice now small and shaky. I had no idea who you were. I just thought— You thought what, exactly? Dr. Washington asked. That because I'm black, I couldn't possibly afford to live here legitimately? That I must be some kind of threat to your property values? That I don't deserve the same respect and welcome that you would give to any other new neighbor? Karen had no answer, because any honest response would only make things worse. Mrs. Chen, who had been watching silently, walked over from her yard. Judge Washington, I'm Helen Chen, your next-door neighbor. Welcome to the neighborhood. If you need any help with anything, please let me know. Her gesture broke the tension slightly and seemed to give other neighbors permission to act. The Johnsons jogged over to introduce themselves. A man from across the street approached with his teenage son, both looking embarrassed by Karen's behavior. Judge Washington, I'm Michael Roberts, the man said, extending his hand. This is my son, David. We're honored to have you in the neighborhood. Please don't let this incident give you the wrong impression about the rest of us. Dr. Washington shook their hands warmly. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I appreciate that. More neighbors continued to approach, each offering welcomes and apologies for Karen's behavior. It became clear that while Karen saw herself as the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian, she didn't speak for anyone but herself. Karen stood alone on her lawn, watching as the woman she'd tried to exclude was warmly welcomed by everyone else. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. In her attempt to maintain the neighborhood's character, Karen had revealed her own character in the worst possible way. Dr. Washington turned back to Karen one final time. "Ms. Mitchell, let me give you some free legal advice. What you did today, attempting to intimidate someone based on their race and suggesting they don't belong in this neighborhood because of their skin color, could potentially constitute housing discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. If you had succeeded in making me feel unwelcome enough to move, you could face federal charges." Karen's face went white. "Are you going to press charges?" Dr. Washington considered this for a moment. "Number. But only because I believe in second chances and the possibility that people can learn from their mistakes. However, let me be very clear. If anything like this happens again, to me or to any other neighbor who doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable, I will not hesitate to pursue every legal remedy available." The authority in her voice left no doubt that she meant every word. "I understand," Karen whispered, looking down at the ground. "I hope you do, Doctor," Washington said, "because this neighborhood, like every neighborhood in America, belongs to everyone who can afford to live here and chooses to be a good neighbor. Race, religion, background, none of that matters. What matters is how we treat each other." As the neighbors began to disperse, several offered to help Dr. Washington with her boxes. The Johnsons invited her to their weekly barbecue. Mrs. Chen mentioned a book club that met monthly. What had started as an ugly confrontation was transforming into a genuine neighborhood welcome. Karen retreated to her house, the weight of her mistake crushing down on her. She'd lived on Maple Ridge Drive for 8 years, considering herself a pillar of the community. Now she was the neighborhood embarrassment, the person everyone would whisper about at block parties. Later that evening, as Dr. Washington unpacked in her new home, she reflected on the day's events. It wasn't the first time she'd faced discrimination, and it probably wouldn't be the last. But what gave her hope was the reaction of the other neighbors. They had chosen to stand with justice rather than stay silent. Her phone rang. It was her sister, calling to check on the move. "How's the new neighborhood?" her sister asked. Dr. Washington looked out her window at the quiet street, where children were playing and neighbors were chatting over garden fences. "It's going to be just fine," she said. 3 months later, Dr. Washington had settled comfortably into life on Maple Ridge Drive. She'd joined Mrs. Chen's book club, attended the Johnsons' barbecues, and helped several neighbors with minor legal questions. She'd become exactly what she'd always intended to be, a good neighbor. Karen, meanwhile, had kept to herself. She still lived on the street but no longer appointed herself as its gatekeeper. Word had spread about what happened, and Karen found herself excluded from the very social circles she'd once tried to protect. One evening, as Dr. Washington watered her front garden, she noticed Karen watching from her window. Their eyes met for a moment, and Karen looked away quickly, embarrassed. Dr. Washington felt a moment of sadness, not for herself, but for Karen. Hatred and prejudice had cost Karen far more than they'd ever cost their targets. The next morning, Dr. Washington found a note in her mailbox. It was from Karen, handwritten on expensive stationery. "Judge Washington," it read. "I know this is too little, too late, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for my behavior when you moved in. I've done a lot of thinking these past months, and I realize that my actions came from fear and ignorance, not any real concern for the neighborhood. You've been nothing but a wonderful addition to our community, and I'm ashamed of how I treated you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to do better. Sincerely, Karen Mitchell." Dr. Washington read the note twice, then folded it carefully. That evening, she walked across the street and rang Karen's doorbell. Karen answered, looking surprised and nervous. "I got your note," Dr. Washington said simply. Karen nodded, waiting. "Thank you for writing it. That took courage." The two women stood in silence for a moment. "I was wondering," Dr. Washington continued, "Mrs. Chen is hosting book club next week. We're reading Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. You're welcome to join us if you're interested." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "You would want me there?" "I believe in second chances," Dr. Washington said. "The question is whether you believe in them too." Karen nodded slowly. "I'd like that very much." The following week, Karen Mitchell sat in Mrs. Chen's living room, listening as Judge Washington led a discussion about justice, mercy, and the power of understanding. It was the beginning of a different kind of education for Karen, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her community and herself. Months later, when new neighbors moved in, a young Latino family with 2 small children, it was Karen who brought them a welcome basket and offered to help them get settled. Dr. Washington watched from her window, smiling. Real change, she knew, happened one person at a time, one conversation at a time, one act of courage at a time. Sometimes it took a federal judge to remind a neighborhood that justice wasn't just something that happened in courtrooms. It was something that had to be practiced every day, in every interaction, by every person willing to choose what's right over what's easy. The story of Judge Washington and Karen Mitchell became a reminder that prejudice thrives in ignorance, but withers in the light of truth and human connection. It showed that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred isn't anger, but patience, education, and the quiet insistence that everyone deserves dignity and respect. And it proved that neighborhoods, like courtrooms, are better when they're governed by justice rather than judgment. In the end, Maple Ridge Drive became exactly what Dr. Washington had always believed it could be, a place where people were judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. It just took a federal judge to remind everyone what that actually meant. Never assume you know someone's story based on how they look. Never let prejudice guide your actions toward your neighbors. And remember that true community is built on inclusion, respect, and the understanding that everyone deserves a place where they can call home. Because you never know when the person you're trying to exclude might be the very person who could teach you what justice really means.